Welcome to Forging Plowshares, a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom of God. We hope this part of our ongoing conversation stimulates your mind and challenges your heart about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Please stay tuned at the end of the podcast for a short message about our ministry.
This is Paul Axton, Director of Forging Plowshares and Plowshares Bible Institute. And in this conversation, Brad and I interview Ethan Vander Leek, who is teaching an upcoming course on peace. We do describe the course in the conversation, but Ethan is going to begin the course April 8th. It'll run through May 27th. You can sign up for the course now on Forging Plowshares at Plowshares Bible Institute website, course enrollment. The cost for the course is $150 for the 8-week course, and we're going to meet Wednesday evenings. Forging Plowshares is a nonprofit ministry, and we greatly appreciate your donations, which allow us to continue our ministry of Forging Plowshares and Plowshares Bible Institute. After the course with Ethan, we are having a course with William Desmond, and we kind of look at Ethan's course partly as preparation for this deep dive with the renowned philosopher William Desmond. Donations can be made on the Outreach International website, oionline.org, through PayPal or Simple Give. Our project number is FP3901. Just select our project number when donating. But hope you appreciate this conversation with Ethan Vander Leek. Hey, I'm here with Ethan Vander Leek and Brad Klingela, and we're talking to Ethan today because Ethan is going to do a class for PBI on peace. And boy, he has put together an exciting class looking at William Desmond, Rowan Williams, Raimon Panikkar, Julian of Norwich. He's put together some excellent readings. And Ethan did his PhD dissertation bringing together the work of Rowan Williams and William Desmond. But what I'm curious about, if you could tell us your journey. You're a young guy that has come to, you're doing in-depth work very early in life. And so clearly you have a rich background. And so I'm just curious about where in the world did you come from?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I'm 36, so I don't know, when do I hit middle age?
Oh, not yet.
Yeah, so I'm Canadian. I'm from grew up in the suburbs of Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, and grew up in the Christian Reformed Church. So I'm the grandchild of Dutch immigrants. My parents met at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I was baptized as an infant and just always found a kind of excitement in learning about the Bible and Sunday school, being involved in youth group and so on. But yeah, then in university, I went to small Christian school in Edmonton, Alberta, with Reformed roots. But yeah, what there was introduced to continental philosophy. I read John Caputo and Heidegger, Levinas, and all at a Christian university. And it was so exciting to be reading these amazing writers and thinkers, provocative insights about the world we live in. And so that was just what kind of really inspired my intellectual journey. Yeah, and then have been in graduate studies pretty much my whole adult life. Actually, even now that I'm done my PhD, I'm still in graduate studies because I'm pursuing ordination in the Episcopal Church here in the Diocese of Wisconsin, and am completing a diploma in Anglican Studies at Nashotah House Theological Seminary, which is between Milwaukee and Madison. So I'm pursuing ordination in the Episcopal Church. I'm excited to serve God in that way. And over the years, I've spent so much time reading Rowan Williams, William Desmond, thinking about the relationship of philosophy and theology, about how to be a Christian in our modern, postmodern, secular age. I'm interested in questions of technology, of spirituality, of secularism, of how Christian faith is still alive and active today. And for that, Rowan Williams, that is just so indispensable for his articulation of deep Christian truths in our current political, cultural, global climate. Yeah, and then love ministry, love spending time with people, seeing how Jesus is at work in their lives.
That's interesting. Are you familiar with Pella, Iowa?
A
I think,
town?
yeah, it's I think
No.
it's oh, okay. Well, I'm not claiming I'm a big expert on it, but actually when I was in Japan, a lady, she's Japanese, but she was an expert she had studied the Dutch, I think it was the Dutch Reformed community that
Okay.
settled in Pella. And
Interesting.
the guy there who was the leader of that community became very good friends with Abraham Lincoln
Really
and
interesting.
was a spiritual influence. And she claims, and I've never seen this claim anywhere else. I've read her stuff, and substantiates. She did a dissertation on this. She claims that actually Abraham Lincoln went through a conversion experience even while he was in as president.
Is that right?
And she demonstrates it in the shift in his attitudes, and the shift in his use of prayer and
Hmm.
use of scripture. I've never seen anybody else claim that. And
Hmm.
her claim is it's that through this community, this Dutch Reform leader, that he underwent
Oh
that.
wow.
You know.
So yeah, once again, the little Dutch Christian Reformed Church punching above its weight, having this kind of secret influence. That is very interesting. Well, there's not a big, but there is a Reformed university in Iowa as well, in Sioux Center, Iowa, Dort University, it's called. So I wonder if Iowa was a kind of hub for Dutch immigrants. It may have been.
Must have been, yeah, yeah. I know. You can go to Pella, and it still has the Dutch, the architecture, and so it's still very much a presence there. There actually, I think, Ethan, I would say you're kind of on the cutting edge of a generation that's coming up, maybe primarily through Marquette, that are doing William Desmond. And you have this, I know that, who is it? Ryan, who is your professor?
Yeah, my director, yeah, Marquette is one center for looking carefully at Desmond's thought and applying it and thinking it through in different ways. Thanks to Father Ryan Duns, who's a Jesuit priest and was my dissertation director, and his important book on Desmond is Spiritual Exercises for a Secular Age. And so he looks at Desmond as a way to address some of the malaises and struggles and perplexities of secularism as described by Charles Taylor. And so that's Father Ryan's big contribution and how I ended up at Marquette in the first place.
So you're kind of third generation even of a Desmond.
Indeed, yes. Though I've had the pleasure of studying and sort of, or not studying with in any intimate detail with Desmond himself, but have done seminars with him, seen him at lectures. He's very generous. We've been for coffee together, so it's a pretty special time to be studying his thought when we can hear from him
Yeah, yeah.
himself.
Yeah, and so that's the exciting thing. I mean, we're very excited about your class, but after your class, then William Desmond is going to teach a class for us. He's already started putting together the lectures for it.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah, this is our year of William Desmond.
Excellent. Well, I'm planning to take it myself, so
Good
I'll be
deal.
right there alongside you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm probably going to need a tutor for the class if you're open. I have found Desmond's stuff is pretty accessible, I think, unless
His writing is amazing. It is so clear and yet charged with so much depth. So the writing is just amazing.
he has this kind of poetic, maybe it's the Irish, I don't know, but kind of
Mm,
a poetic imagination, a
mm,
depth of imagination that he brings a beauty of expression and to philosophical and theological writings. So,
mm.
but as a kind of introduction, can you describe then for us what you're planning to do, what in this class?
Yeah. Well, it was exciting to meet you, Paul, a few months ago. You did a podcast that sort of brought together Desmond and Williams, and I thought, well, I've been working on this, my dissertation, for many years now. It's worth just saying hello. So that was exciting to make that connection. And then I see the name of the institute is Forging Plowshares from Isaiah's famous vision. And I have been reading about books about peace from various authors, from various perspectives. And so it seemed fitting and appropriate to do a class on peace, focusing not so much on like technique of like, well, how do we make peace? What are practical techniques for peacemaking? But asking ourselves, well, what is peace? What do we mean by this theologically, philosophically, metaphysically? How can we describe creation, human society, human relationships as peaceful? And then, of course, through my reading, and we'll dive into a little bit of this, you discover that there's so many what Desmond would call counterfeit doubles of peace. There are things that masquerade as peace, but in fact are hiding some kind of and various forms of violence, and so are not the sort of deep peace that we might try to describe when we look at the visions of creation in Scripture or the type of peace that Jesus promises to bring. So it's perennially an interesting, important topic. Personally, I struggle with like personal peace, like trying to feel peaceful myself. And so there's also an interesting connection between personal or inner peace and outer peace. These things go together. So peace works at multiple different levels. So the course, just to quickly wrap up, will kind of do a bit of a chronological walkthrough, looking at scripture and some early philosophical ideas about peace, some ideas in the Christian tradition, but then spending most of our time in the 20th and 21st centuries about how have recent writers in religion and philosophy described what peace is, what holds us back from peace, the challenges to peace today. So that those will turn us to Desmond and Williams, as we described, but also Thomas Merton, and a key voice here, some Jewish and Muslim voices, interreligious dialogue. So I'm looking forward to scratching and under the surface of all these different thinkers and writers on this topic.
In the piece that is there a Sabbath for thought, the one that you actually attached and recommended, I noticed that in other words, when Desmond is talking about peace, he's doing it's almost like he's doing everything at once. He's talking about
Mm-hmm.
an originary peace, but an
Mm-hmm.
originary peace that is that certainly is immediately applicable to the individual, but in as much in the same way it's applicable to peace between people.
Mm-hmm.
But he begins that, or throughout that article or that chapter in his book, he continually refers back to it is good.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was quite profound.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explicate a little bit why is that originary understanding key in our grasping this vision that Desmond has?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So Desmond, one of the brilliant approaches he takes to philosophy is he draws freely on religion and scripture itself. And so here he's drawing on the famous phrase from Genesis chapter 1, where God creates and orders the world and repeats over and over again, the text does, and it was good, and it was good. And then, famously, when humanity is created, it was very good. And so Desmond loves this phrase because it describes for him the relation of creator and creation, that God creates a good world, and God does not create a world that is good for him. It does not say the world was good for God, or God doesn't say this is good for me. I needed this to complete myself or to fulfill myself. But no, it is good for itself. It is good in its difference from God. And so that is one of the key insights that Desmond takes from this phrase, it is good. And then we can go further, I think, and say in Genesis chapter 1, and this is a really important idea for peace as we'll explore it, we're talking about diversity. There is a diversity and difference in creation. And that also is what is celebrated. As the creation account unfolds, there's divisions that are made between light and dark, between land and sea, diversity of creatures. And that also is very good. So difference itself is good. And that relates importantly to peace, because difference is so often what we take to be an impediment to peace, that there's violence between different types of creatures, and then especially in human terms, differences between cultures, between personalities, between perspectives. We think that this creates inherent violence. But Genesis and saying that it is good reminds us that no, true peace is not a subsuming of everything into a totalizing unity, but in fact involves enduring relations of difference, but peacefully dwelling, not violently dwelling. So those are a few thoughts about why this phrase "it is good" is so important for Desmond.
Let me tell you the feeling that I got from this, and you tell me if it's accurate. And that is that, if God himself, there is a kind of unselfish giving, I think, in creation. And so often in human desire, when we say that something's good, we'd like to consume it. We'd like to own it. We'd like to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think in the divine voice, here, that there is this appreciation just for the goodness of things, not because it's good for me. In other words, the way that God relates to this is also the way that we can relate to this.
Mm-hmm.
That it is just, there is, maybe it's becoming an old guy or something. As I've gotten older, I can have an appreciation of maybe that I didn't have. I think I did some as a young man. I have just gotten to the point that I can just, and maybe I share this with Desmond, but he seems to have come to this very early, that just the beauty and of things that we can recognize their inherent goodness. And there is then this throughout, he's talking about this kind of overflow of goodness.
Mm-hmm.
That, in other words, we don't need to own this thing. We don't have to have this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a Larry McMurtry fan?
It's not a name I recognize.
Well, he's a cowboy writer, and I'm from
okay.
Jackson.
Right.
They do the big trail ride up to Montana, and he's an old man. He has a boy. The way that he spends his days, he just goes out to the corral and he watches his son working horses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his major delight in life.
Mm-hmm.
There's just an ability. In other words, I see this in what Desmond is describing in this, it is good. It is that
Mhm.
that it is a description of our own relationship and realization of this
Mhm.
goodness.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I think that yes, it's rooted in God's relation to creation. God does not, like you said, create for God's selfish purposes. But we can, and so that's the foundation for what we might call contemplation, where you look at something and appreciate it for its own sake, its own goodness. It is good. And so that is the foundational story. Scripture claims about God's relation to creation. And we can, by grace, share in that vision when we look at, well, our children is a good example. I'm a new dad, actually. And so I also spend a lot of my time trying to manage the household and get the diapers changed and so on. But there are moments where all of a sudden you're struck by like the beauty of this little girl, like just playing with her toys and how she is other than me. She serves no function in my life in the kind of technical or economic way. And that is a moment of it is good. That is a sharing in God's creative perspective on the world.
Brad knows all about this.
We interviewed Desmond. People can go back to that interview. That's fantastic. You spoke about the ways in which Desmond writes in a very accessible way. If you were, sitting on a park bench next to somebody and they said, I want 7 minutes of a high level explication of why you're in love with Desmond and what he offers the world. And, their kids are coming in 7 minutes, but they're quite academically capable. What would you tell them?
Well, we've already said some of the things about the how compelling the writing is. He sketches out, and we could go into this in more detail, but he develops his own kind of vocabulary and his own systematic way of describing different things in the world, human communities, the human person, the relation of God and creation. But even as he's developing this kind of technical vocabulary, it's done so poetically and so clearly. And indeed, at the beginning of certain chapters, or every chapter in one of his books, he opens with a poem, that his own poetry. So he really recognizes that there are limits to what sort of philosophical discourse can grasp, and we need to turn to poetry, to the arts, to religion, to lived experience. Like, theory is powerful and beautiful and is important for us to make sense of our world, but it also serves something outside of itself. So that's another powerful, exciting part of Desmond's thought, is how, and he writes a book early in his career called Philosophy and Its Others, noting that philosophy needs to be engaged not only with talking to itself, but engaging with artists and with religious people and with politics and psychology, and just generally this idea that philosophy is not a self-enclosed discipline. And that's what makes him so fruitful for someone who, like myself, who spends a lot of time in theology and in religion, religious studies, and in religious communities and in prayer. So he is a philosopher that is just so, a term he develops and would use is porous. He is open to these other aspects of being human that are not captured by theory or by philosophy alone. And so he talks really beautifully about the failure of philosophy, not a sort of total erasure of philosophy, but how it comes up to this kind of limit and then ends in almost prayer or praise or religion. Yeah, so those are a few of the things that I have just totally fallen in love with about Desmond's writing. And then I just love how he explores just the biggest questions in such kind of simple ways, like we've already been describing, but he doesn't get obsessed with minute details. He can be very technical and precise, but it's always with this urgency of like, what are the big questions? And that's why this course is sort of in that light, thinking like, this is a big question. What is peace? Peace in our own lives, peace in the world. And Desmond is just a brilliant sort of way into these big questions. What is art? What is religion? Who is God? What is the good life? Like, this is philosophy, not just as like an academic discipline, but it's philosophy that is engaged with how we're living in the world, how we're interacting with each other.
When you say that he engages with these large questions, what is art, for example? Somebody who is interested in these large questions but is new to them, who hasn't had a lot of background, they're asking me, what is art? My go-to essay for everybody as to what art is the essay by Flannery O'Connor, The Nature and Aim of Fiction. I cannot think of a better introduction to an explication of art than her essay. Is his response to what is art something that is accessible to a person who is, college educated and wants to know what art is?
Well, there are different types of writings, like in Desmond's corpus. So the essay that we're kind of touching on already, Is There a Sabbath for Thought? That's from a collection of sort of more meditative essays about religion. And they draw on all of his like really deep technical work on Hegel and Nietzsche and Heidegger and so on. So he has a big, difficult work on art and aesthetics. I forget what it's called, Art and the Origin. I think, Paul, you just also wrote a blog on Hegel's aesthetics. So there's those kind of technical pieces.
I was just using Desmond there, and Desmond does begin with a deep appreciation of Hegel's aesthetics, and that was what he pointed me to, that article. And so I think that that's the thing about Desmond. He's kind of passed through a deep appreciation of Hegel and taking the best of Hegel, and certainly in regard to aesthetics.
Yeah. So some of that stuff is more technical and scholarly, but I would again, this is one of my favorite books by Desmond, Philosophy and Its Others. And there's, like I said, there's chapters on philosophy and religion, philosophy and ethics. And then one of the chapters is also philosophy and aesthetics, or philosophy and art. And so this is a more accessible place to turn. So there's a diversity of different writings in Desmond to turn on some of these issues.
Let me ask you something in regard to, we're back to, is there a Sabbath for thought? And as he was saying, I tend to relate everything to psychoanalytic understanding. And of course, the problem is that for most people, the answer is no. In other words, the mind is not something that they themselves are in control of, but they are in some way, it's sort of the Hegelian dialectic, that the master-slave dialectic is occurring in their own mind. But explain to us how Desmond answers that question.
Can you say again, what do you mean? Which question in particular?
Is there a Sabbath for thought?
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, so that's the title of his collection of essays that's subtitled Between Religion and Philosophy. Is there a Sabbath for thought? And he raises this because, especially in modern and postmodern philosophy, there's this sense that the human mind, philosophy as a discipline, as a culture, is kind of on the attack. It is, it's meant to like grasp and understand the world, digging beneath often, different forms of oppression, or in psychology, like, well, what are the unconscious drives? Like, philosophy is in the business of getting to the bottom of things from a position of, well, we can finally come to know and circumscribe reality within our own sort of minds and frameworks. And this certainly leaves no Sabbath for thought. This is not a thought that is at rest, but this is philosophy that is aggressive. It can be variously described as violent. And some philosophers will celebrate this, and not entirely wrongly so, because it is exciting to be in the business of figuring things out, and maybe being able to put a philosophical opponent like in their place, or just for yourself to kind of be on this journey. Maybe Desmond would call it an erotic journey, where you are reaching beyond yourself in order to pull things into your own orbit and own self-understanding. But once again, this does not leave a Sabbath for thought. But Desmond would say that, yes, there is a Sabbath for thought. We've already talked about, he turns to scripture. Of course, this notion of Sabbath, deeply scriptural, a point of rest where thought can, instead of doing all this analyzing and categorizing, sort of distinguishing things, there can be a release, a rest, a Sabbath. And so that's why he talks really beautifully about how thought he turns to different phrases. And so one of the things is you say, like, oh, it struck me that, like, when you're talking about it struck me that this or that, and that sort of phrase makes it sound like, wait a second, I am not entirely the agent here. There's something from outside myself that I am receiving. And that allows Desmond to then turn to what in many ways is a Christian description of prayer, because prayer for Christian theology, one understanding is that it is not us that do it as sort of autonomous, self-governing creatures, but it is the Spirit in us that prays. And that's why philosophy, followed with Desmond, can find this sort of release, the Sabbath rest, this peace. So we don't have to be sort of following this kind of drive of philosophy or thought to always be on the move, always be aggressive. There is a Sabbath for thought, and that is prayer.
It strikes me that this is not unrelated to Ian McGilchrist's work on, and for those who are not familiar with it, what I'm going to invoke here is not the popular understanding of it, but the left and the right brain. That the left brain is subsuming everything into a particular category, and it quote unquote knows everything, because once the presuppositions are loaded into the sort of programming of the left brain, then it just, like, it absolutely knows everything. And the right brain is open to the capaciousness of mystery and the more than articulable, the more than reduction to a particular logic, and that he is honing in on this way in which we do not need to be the person who is the agent, who is in control of everything, who understands everything, who, in some ways we could relate it to the libido domini, the desire to control everything. And Desmond talks about the passio ascendi, the way in which we don't actually have to, like, climb our way to God. Sometimes we're drawn to God, and that grace is always something which is before our action, and we are actually responding to it, and it gives us this great release from having to have control and mastery over everything. I don't, so those are just brief reflections that I invite your wisdom to respond to, and see if that is concordant with what you think he's doing.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think that you said it very well there. I could just quote maybe briefly from the chapter that we're discussing, where what does Desmond say? Perhaps it is prayer that is the Sabbath thinking, its fulfillment and the highest lucidity of its peace. Is prayer what happens when thought wakes up to itself beyond its own work, waking not just to itself, but being awoken to its source and purpose in the ultimate power beyond itself? It's released from itself as work. And so philosophy, as he described earlier in the essay, and I tried to articulate here, philosophy is so often this effort, this work of analyzing, of defeating, of kind of outward aggression. And so thought, the highest form of philosophy, is to sort of have that outward movement sort of cease, come to a rest, and we receive then the gift from beyond, which is God.
One more element that I want to get to, and I know that you could you tell us a little bit about what excites you about Rowan Williams? I know that he is a genius. I know that some consider him the greatest theologian of our time. I know we'll be covering him, but could you tell our audience who are not familiar with him, other than that he's this towering genius, what should excite them about Rowan's work?
Yeah. Well, the text that I'm looking forward to discussing is his book called The Truce of God, it's called. And this is Williams' little analysis of peace, and a distinctly theological, ecclesial, Christocentric discussion of peace. So what has Rowan Williams was the Archbishop of Canterbury, so that sort of catapulted him beyond theology into a sort of world stage as the sort of spiritual leader of so many Anglicans around the world, of which I am one. So I love his engagement. What first drew me to him was his engagement with the history of Christian spirituality, his brilliant and early book, The Wound of Knowledge, which is a fabulous overview of so many important spiritual writers through the Christian centuries. And he just articulates and summarizes these complex figures and thought so well. He has very much two different levels of writing, some incredibly dense, difficult theological and philosophical work. But honestly, I am so in love with, and this sort of falls into another category of a kind of book that kind of springs from or has the feel of public lectures, and he articulates the Christian truth and insight with so much humility, so much precision, invites so much further discussion and thought, and just challenges you constantly to be a better follower of Jesus by engaging more carefully with those people around you. And so that's what I'll conclude on with Rowan Williams, is that one of his emphases that I love, and that is also difficult and infuriating, is how he keeps turning you back to your neighbor. He will never let your relation with God or with Jesus bypass the particular person who you are encountering, your family member, your coworker, especially the people in the church, your political opponent. And that's a key theme that we'll have to explore about in relation to peace is, well, how do we avoid a peace that just is an escape from difficult conversations, difficult relationships? And Williams is powerfully resistant to anything that suggests that peace is some kind of withdrawal. And I really like and am challenged by that insight.
I appreciate you saying that, the suggestion that peace is a kind of withdrawal, because I struggle with the language in my philosophy group, when I tease people into pacifism. They're like, well, you're just sitting back. And I'm like, no, it's nonviolent engagement. So I'm trying to find better language than pacifism, nonviolent engagement, nonviolent resistance, nonviolent transformation. I can't find language that works precisely for it. Have you found any that captures that for us?
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is one of the things that maybe this kind of 8-week seminar can help us construct. But yes, what comes across through the readings that come from different perspectives is this idea that you're saying now. Peace is not some kind of absence of movement or energy. It is not a lack of creativity. Desmond opens the essay by talking about how music brings peace in particular moments, but music is a dynamic, creative enterprise. And so music in so many ways is such a great metaphor for Christian ethics, especially like jazz, like improvisational music, where you're engaged in a world that is playing a particular tune or a particular melody, but Christian creativity invites us to engage that, and take it up in kind of a new creative way. So anyway, sorry, no precise term to offer there, but I resonate with your insight. Yeah.
Maybe it's an opportune time to ask you. The Brad's question leads to the name of the class is a Jesus quotation.
Mm-hmm.
My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives.
Mm-hmm.
Can you run down then why that name and what is the significance of this? What is the contrast of Jesus' peace with the world's peace?
Uh-huh. Yeah. And that will be something interesting that I think comes up. What we learned from this essay from Desmond, and he's really drawing heavily on Augustine here, is pointing out how all of life at some level assumes a kind of primordial peace. Like people only go to war to bring about peace, is one of the kind of arguments that that's a very unsophisticated way of saying it, but that's what Desmond and Augustine kind of help us to see. And it's an important insight that there actually is a kind of primordial peace, and we can explore more specifically how that argument works. But yes, Rowan Williams, who follows very much in Thomas Merton's footsteps here, is really attuned to how there are so many forms of peace that are false forms of peace. And so the type of peace that Jesus gives is different, and the way that he gives it is different. So it's just really important to always be suspicious of ourselves when we think that, oh, I have sort of enjoyed or created peace, or our community is enjoying such peace right now. And the question that Jesus poses and that Merton and Williams help us to see is, well, in what ways are you sort of externalizing your own sort of self-hatred or anxiety outside of yourself or your group to create this kind of false sense of peace? And so that's why the peace that Jesus brings also creates division, because people are faced with Jesus himself and they're forced to confront their sinfulness, their falsehoods. And so that's why William says so beautifully, I'll just read quickly here. The Gospels do not present us with a figure marked by any evident serenity, rather with someone in important respects scarred by his own divisive role and painfully aware of the costliness of what he is doing. And then Jesus is a man profoundly not at home with his world and his contemporaries. And so in our terms is a singularly unpeaceful person. So there's just no shortcuts to true peace, and true peace will always go through a kind of excruciating self-examination, self-criticism. It's in the hope of this primordial peace that we've discussed, but we can't avoid the challenge and difficulty of peace. There's no sort of meditation app or yoga class you can take that will skip over the difficulty of peace in a world that we live in that is so unpeaceful.
You're pointing us also to Raimon Panikkar. Give a rundown for us the significance of Panikkar for the class.
Yeah, he's just one of my favorite philosophical writers. He wrote a book on peace, and so we'll be reading that in its entirety. It's called Cultural Disarmament, The Way to Peace. Panikkar was a child of a Catholic mother and a Hindu father, and so kind of bore in his own flesh and his own identity a certain interreligious dialogue, and that is a deep part of the kind of work that he did throughout his life. He died in the early years of the 21st century. And so he was a Catholic priest, but he is really interested in encouraging religions and cultures to engage with one another, but not in a kind of like, well, we just need to get past our differences kind of way. Not in the sense of like, well, what we not he's not saying that, well, particularity itself is the problem, and we need to kind of find this sort of universal religion that underlies all of our particular cultural and religious identities. He is very interested in particular perspectives being both irreducible yet called into a relationship with other perspectives. And so he writes in some ways very similarly, actually, to Desmond, with a kind of real spiritual and poetic depth and ease. The amount that he wrote is impressive, and he wrote in detail on Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, especially. And so, yes, I'm really looking forward to examining his text called Cultural Disarmament, The Way to Peace. And that title, Cultural Disarmament, he says, we can only have military disarmament with cultural disarmament. We also need to examine how we impose a sort of cultural hegemony on those outside of ourselves, assuming that our perspective is some kind of neutral, universal perspective, when in fact we need to be sort of humbled and open to otherness. So that emphasis on difference will come up again and again in his thought too.
Maybe this relates to that one of the quotes that we have here, and I think that this is a quote that you pointed us to from Merton. And that is, I think that in so much of when we're thinking of peace, in an Aristotelian sense, that, well, the way you obtain peace is through war, or that in some way the violence always precedes the peace. And the way that Merton puts it here, we built up such an obsession with evil, both in ourselves and in others, that we waste all our mental energy trying to account for this evil, to punish it, to exorcise it, or to get rid of it in any way we can. We drive ourselves mad with our preoccupation, and in the end, there is no outlet left but violence. We have to destroy something or someone. By that time, we have created for ourselves a suitable enemy, a scapegoat, in whom we have invested all the evil in the world. He is the cause of every wrong.
That's writing.
That reminded me a little bit of the Lacanian perspective. Of course, there really isn't peace in Zizek and Lacan, and I sometimes worry if there is, the thing that we've been describing throughout is that there is this overflow. I think that Desmond's word for this is a godsend. That we're given something, we're brought into something that's larger than ourselves. And of course, the diagnosis of the human sickness, I think, in a Lacanian or Freudian perspective, very much it follows what Merton is describing. That is, the way in which we would get rid of the death drive is itself the death drive. That our obsession with, imagining that we can get to the bottom of this thing, or we can defeat this evil on its own ground, well, that is the human sickness. And that almost, that psychoanalytic picture of the struggle, the human agonistic struggle, that applies personally, but that just seems to apply, in terms of countries, in terms of person over and against person. That is that there is the sense that we are so focused on ridding ourselves of the evil, or getting rid of that we're focused on the violence to such a degree as the means, that in a way our logic is given completely over to this kind of necessity of struggle and violence.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that then what at least that's what I felt especially when I was reading Desmond,
Mm-hmm.
that here is someone, out of a country that has been torn apart by religious violence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, every culture. I mean, right now we're in the midst of a war in this country, a kind of senseless, useless sort of war. To me, that if that the Sabbath for thought, that
Mm-hmm.
is peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way it comes to us, that there's a checking out of one logic, one world system, and there's an opening to a Sabbath rest that is not something that we create, but that is created for us.
Yeah. And there I would turn to what Merton and Williams in some more depth describe about how Jesus is this godsend, but we've already talked about how Jesus kind of provokes division. And that's because Jesus confronts us with the truth of our sinfulness, our violence. We assume, as the quote you said from Merton, we assume that we are innocent and that we are simply acting violently because we are sort of forced into it almost. But true peace is this kind of self-innocence. And Jesus exposes that. Jesus says, no, like you need to face actually the evil in yourself. And that's why there's this important emphasis on repentance. And so that's also why the peace of Jesus also does not feel like peace. It feels like an attack on myself when I have to recognize my complicity in violence. But it's also in light of that more primordial peace that you were nicely describing there.
I was looking here at your quote from Rowan Williams in A Truce with God. And I thought this ties in too. The Church Catholic is a sacrament of peace. In other words, what we're about, that Desmond is describing, that Williams is describing, this is the whole point. That peace is the whole point, the peace that Christ gives unto us. He goes on to say, not a peace of undramatic, tepid coexistence and non-involvement, but a peace which is free, active involvement, compassion, gratefully receiving, generous offering, reciprocal enrichment. This is the peace Jesus creates between God and world, because it is the kind of peace which exists between him and his Father. Actually, it's that last line I want you to explain to me. What does he mean by that? It is this kind of peace which exists between him and his Father.
Yeah, well, Jesus lives out this kind of paradox of, as we've described, like being in a violent world and provoking people to act violently against him and feeling keenly that weight. So, as William said, right, he seems a very unpeaceful person. He weeps, he goes to his death. This does not like seem like a particularly peaceful life. Like when he acts, when he talks, people are upset, they're disturbed, people are forced to make decisions. And Jesus himself says, I will turn, family against family, and I come not to bring peace, but a sword. So that is all true. But what comes through in all of the Gospels, particularly, I suppose, in the Gospel of John, is this intimate, peaceful relation that Jesus, the incarnate Son, enjoys and has from all eternity with the Father, the source of all. And so Jesus is playing out, in a broken, sinful, historical world, that perfect, loving relation between the eternal Father and the eternal Son, and comes to bring this and to enable his followers, the church, to be drawn into this relation, so that the church, of course, caught up in its own history of violence, tragically so. The church is a kind of at its best or at its deepest is a kind of living into that Trinitarian relation of the Son to the Father.
You mean the Father's not angry with the Son, and that's why he died? And I'm being facetious, but I'm
Of
afraid,
course.
in other words, what you've described, God is peace. And I'm afraid that so much of what we've done with Christianity is rather than an originary peace, we actually are positing an originary violence
Indeed.
between the Father and the Son.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that is absolutely not the perspective I take. But then I would add that once again, like the life of Jesus, it's not as if we have to abandon the metaphors, say, of God's judgment or maybe even wrath, though obviously needs to be understood very particularly. But Jesus himself is that judgment of God upon a sinful, violent world. This is the truth in the flesh, judging you and the way that you have set up your identity and your community. And so it's not to talk about God as peaceful and nonviolent is, as we've already mentioned, is not to say, oh, this is a kind of everything's okay and you don't need to, there's no, like, we have to downplay our discussions of sin and so on. We need to, God absolutely judges sin, and his judgment is the life of Jesus. That is God's judgment on a sinful world. And we are exposed, our truth is unveiled, that we are not innocent when we look at and submit ourselves to this story, to this man.
And this is a short interview to encourage people to draw from Ethan's wisdom and from Desmond's wisdom and from Rowan Williams' wisdom, and I think is a great setup to prepare for William Desmond, is a setup to read William Williams, and is a setup to figure out how to enact an active nonviolent engagement. It's always the moment to enact active nonviolent engagement. I, as a person in the United States at this point in time, feel it to be acute, but you can really look at any point in any culture and society and see that now is the moment. It may be just that for myself, I feel that now is the moment acutely because I am one born as an untimely person, as Paul was, and recognize that I have not fully seen the gospel's call to be engaged in a way that is forgiving and is peaceful and is offering a different way for the world than to try to bring about peace through violence. And it took me this long because I had to recognize myself as profoundly broken, profoundly violent, and profoundly in need of God's love, such that I was not despairing, but actually trusting in God's universal salvific enactment for everybody, for which I have a deep trust. So I encourage people to join us in this time that is auspicious for our listeners, even if it's a universal auspiciousness at all points in time for those who are hearing this. Maybe it's a call.
Did you have you crossed paths with Stanley Hauerwas or studied?
I've never met him, but I have read like a handful of essays, and I just know he's been so influential on people who I love. One of my favorite political theologians is William Kavanaugh. William Kavanaugh?
So we did an interview with William Kavanaugh.
Oh, he's an amazing man, an amazing, insightful writer on Christianity and politics, right? He was a student of Hauerwas. So his influence has kind of come to me more through And my undergraduate professor was Doug Herring. Do you know Douglas Herring? Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah. I've read something by Herring.
He wrote a book called Paul Among the Post Liberals.
That's it. That's the
Yeah.
book I read. Yeah.
Anyway, he was also kind of a student of Hauerwas. So yes, not directly so much, but indirectly, yeah. Do you like Hauerwas?
I do, yeah. And maybe this is just something that people of nonviolent or pacifist persuasion. I suppose we've all come across Hauerwas, yeah, he's been a major influence.
Mm-hmm.
I used a lot of his stuff when I was teaching in a Bible college here,
Right,
and introduced them to Hauerwas.
right.
He is operating, of course, at several levels. He's an academic, and he's widely read, but then he gives the appearance of someone who is so earthy, but the two things go together so well, in him.
Yeah.
I've had a deep appreciation of him. We actually I didn't do the interview. We have an interview with Hauerwas on Jonathan Toddy, who's also works with us,
Right.
interviewed him. Hauerwas doesn't do technology. And
I'm not surprised.
he said, well, I'll do an interview, but I'll do it over the phone.
Okay.
So our sound is not real great. We're sure looking forward to the class, Ethan.
To have the experience of teaching a class like this, it's just such a cool, as I understand it, it's such a cool community that you've kind of put together of people from all over the country, all over the world, who have a kind of common interest in a handful of themes and an approach to theology and philosophy, and for the community and the connection. So
there's no money in it. And I think I'm probably just Brad thinks that I'm totally obscure, and he's probably right. The stuff maybe, I think we have a very niche group. First of all, we're doing nonviolence, but then we're on top of that, we're doing a lot of pretty heavy philosophical stuff and philosophical stuff. So I'm sure we're weeding out, what
certain types of students.
Yeah. So
right.
But so that as a result, the people that do come to the classes or that follow us they're pretty well.
Right.
In past classes, I think nearly everybody had graduate degrees, and a lot of them had doctorate, PhDs.
Right.
So it's not
pretty high level.
It's high level, so you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
But
I hope we can kind of because I love doing high level stuff, but that's what I love about Desmond too, is it's so high level, but it's so simple. And so someone without a graduate degree with a little encouragement and patience could also get a lot out of reading Desmond, Williams, of course. Yeah.
Great.
So, what's his class going to be called?
I named it and he never objected.
Oh, okay.
And I need to make sure, but I just called it metaxology.
Oh, okay. He's going to kind of do introduction to his thought, basically.
He's doing 2 weeks. He's devoting 2 weeks to each topic. He's doing theology and philosophy, aesthetics, ethics.
Yeah.
He's already sending me lectures.
Okay.
He wanted to do the lectures separate.
Right.
And then have him watch, and then.
Yeah, well, he is really generous in that regard. When I was, we read a book of his with Father Ryan, and he spent like 2 hours on a Zoom call with us in the class. Yeah. So. And then what was really cool was I went to Ireland to University of Maynooth and did a week where he was just kind of doing a summary and discussion of God in the between. And so I got to have seminar with him every day. There was like 5 of us in this tiny little room. It was awesome.
Wow.
It was really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So he knows you.
He does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of see your stuff as getting us prepared for him. So
we're going to read that, the essay that we discussed today. That will be featured in the class. And then he also has an essay on, from his book God Sends. He has an essay on interculturality, immanence and transcendence in intercultural perspective. So I want to read that alongside of some Panikkar. I think would be fruitful.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Yeah. So looking forward to that.
I just invite you to say any final words of your own excitement for engaging with people together.
Yeah, I'm just grateful for your thoughts and questions, invitation to be part of your community at Forging Plowshares. It's been an exciting new community to sort of dip my feet into these last few months. Yeah, I'm excited. The class is not set up to be like super technical. It is asking big questions at a level that I think is both accessible and deep. And so we can pray that we experience something of Sabbath for the mind, for the heart, for the soul, as we engage with each other. And then also that it is so timely in some ways, but also so just these topics are perennial and transcendent. And I'm just interested to explore that with other people. I want to host and empower some good discussion and conversation. That's definitely what I'm very excited for.
All right.
Well, thanks so much. If you think of anything else that I need to attend to, otherwise I have the link to the course page. So I'm going to be, if I kind of need some more direction. So
yeah, probably if you're needing my help, you're really desperate.
Nice.
All right, Ethan, I sure appreciate you. Doing the course for us. I think
I'm excited, and I appreciate you very much as well. So we'll keep in touch.
All right.
Soon.
All right then.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Forging Plowshares is a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom by providing in-depth, transformative biblical and theological education and discipleship. If you have found this podcast valuable, please remember to share on social media. If you have questions about what you've heard, or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Forging Plowshares or even support this ministry financially, please visit our website, forgingplowshares.org.